All right, what do you think, Ben? How are we doing now?
I think it's pretty good. You know, my echo cancellation wasn't on. I just turned it on.
Mm-hmm.
I just heard a little echo, but I don't think it's a big deal. I think it's going to be all right, as long as it's only a few here and there.
Yeah, I think we'll be okay. It might be, and I'm not picking on you, Brad, but it might be since he doesn't have headphones, but it's a lot fainter than it was. So I think I'll be able to deal with it if you guys will be.
You know what we could try real quick? Brad, could you click on your microphone and X out your sound? Just mute your mic for a minute, and then we'll talk and see if you just click on that microphone button once, I believe that'll mute
I think we can mute him, actually. I just muted him.
Okay. So are you
Can
still
you hear
hearing
me,
the
Ben?
echo? Yeah, I don't hear any echo.
I don't hear any echo either. Brad, go ahead and talk for me.
Okay. How do we sound? Testing 1, 2, 3, and
Yeah.
all that good business.
So now I don't hear it. Do you hear it, Ben?
No, not yet.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
that's enough to drive you up a wall. But anyway.
Well, maybe
say
every
we
now
just-
and then, if we start getting an echo, we'll just mention it, and then we can mute him for a minute and start over again. At least we have
Sounds
some tools
good.
in our audio tool belt now.
Okay.
We got to get the hindquarters on this audio system moving. We're not crossing forward and through enough.
There you go. All right. Cool. So this is episode 38 of On the Move. With us today via Montana is Brad Cameron. Brad currently is a maker of, we'll talk about all the different things you make, but from what we've talked about, it seems like you make a lot of head stalls these days at the Bridle Horse Shop, which you run, and we'll be interested to talk about that. And you've also been a clinician and a packer and a rancher and a multitude of other things that I'm sure we'll all get to. When we do these intros, we try not to, I try not to spell out your accolades for you. We'll let you describe what you are and are not. But Brad Cameron, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate you making the time.
You bet. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So I feel I've got what I think is a really interesting story. At least it's a big deal to me. And I was going to save this like for the podcast when we were recording. And it goes back to the first time I ever heard about you. And you know, later we can talk about the E-Bar-L and how I put two to two together.
Sure.
But in the very beginning, to give you some context about me, I grew up in Virginia, still live here on the family ranch. And I think I was maybe into high school, early college. And I grew up, like, my dad ran the ranch, and my mom worked for the equine science department at Virginia Tech. And she was a dressage trainer before that. And so grew up around horses my whole life, and had, you know, started horses kind of in the traditional, I guess you'd say the traditional, like, hunter jumper type way of starting horses, which looking back now, I like, you know, glad I have all my fingers and toes because we did some pretty reckless stuff. But my dad had always been interested in getting some mules. And he wanted, particularly, he wanted a team of mules to drive, but he also was interested in having a mule to ride. And he was like, if I get this mule to ride, will you start it for me? And I said, sure, you know, let's start whatever. But then we got it. And I said, you know, in kind of, again, my ignorance, my naivety, I was like, well, you know, I've started a lot of horses, but I don't know anything about mules. So maybe I need to, like, figure out something to figure out how to start this thing. And so obviously I just go to the internet and I buy your colt starting and groundwork DVDs because I'm like, well, this is the mule guy. And so if I'm going to learn how to start a mule, I'm got to do it here. And so I, watched those DVDs pretty religiously, started the mule, and like things went well. And I was like, man, this stuff goes pretty good. I wonder if any of that works on horses. And, it sprinkled in it here or there. And I was like, oh, son of a gun. Some of this stuff does work on horses, and, and, as time went on, like I said, later, I ended up going out to Montana and, working at that ranch where Louie's at. And I got to hear about, everyone's talking about this Ray Hunt guy. And again, in my like pure ignorance and naivete, I was like, oh, okay, I'll check it out. And I watched him and I was like, that Ray Hunt guy's just doing what I already learned from Brad Cameron. Like he's just, taking it from Brad. Cause like, in my like, I don't know, 18-year-old brain or whatever, you were like the source of all this because I had this whole other like kind of establishment of horse knowledge, right? And I was like, okay, so that's how you must deal with horses. And then it was like, this must be how you deal with mules over here. And then, I was fortunate to get around some people who very in a very gentle way kind of educated me to how uneducated I was. And then from there, went on to, get around folks like Buck Brannaman and some folks that were practicing this style of horsemanship. And now it's, I've made a career out of it. But all circling back, really, you were the first person that I ever saw practicing this stuff. And it was because I felt like it was because of that mule. I was like, well, I don't know anything about mules. And I just from what I saw with mules, like if we do stuff with that mule that we do with our other colts, I have a feeling I am going to get hurt. So I got to figure out how to work with this mule. And it kind of started me on the long, arduous journey of horsemanship that I'm still on today.
Well, that's good. I mean, at least the mule got you started there. That's a good deal. Usually goes the other way around, but
Yeah. Yeah, no, we got him going and got him riding, going around the cattle and stuff. And it I was pleased with it. But like I said, I just imagined, I was like, well, this must be how you have to work with mules because they're just not that common in this part of the country. They're bigger kind of in the south than they are. We're in like the Appalachian Mountains here, and there's not a ton of them.
okay.
So, but yeah, so I just thought you maybe kind of chuckle at that because the first time I saw Ray Hunt, I was like, well, he's just doing all that Brad Cameron stuff. Like this Ray Hunt guy, I don't know why everyone's thinking he's the big deal.
Well, unfortunately, I wasn't the one that started it, so
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that is a funny story. I'd never heard anything like that before, but that's good. And
Yep.
it was because of that I got started doing what I did there for the longest time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I distinctly remember you in those videos. Um, it was like the first time I had ever, I guess I had seen it, but I'd ever really paid attention. You were like riding this mule around with just your legs, not like with your arms crossed. And, now that's like a thing in the horsemanship world. That's a
Right.
big deal. But I saw that for the first time. And I was like, I've never seen someone do that on a horse, let alone a mule. I like, how is that guy doing that stuff, And so no, it was really good for me looking back now because it sparked something in me. And like I said, now I ride horses for the public for a living because I wanted to pursue this. So um,
Good.
it's just kind of cool. So if you probably didn't mean to, but you making those DVDs had a profound impact on my life from a couple time zones away.
Well, that's good. That's really good. I've a lot of people have told me about that, and I I hear people like on some podcasts actually talk about Brad Cameron and the influence I had on them, and it's still quite amazing to me personally that I had that big influence on people. I never really set out to have that big influence on people. Wanted to have an influence on the mule, but um, it's quite humbling to hear about all that and from different people, and so it's yeah, it really it's really an interesting thing.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
well,
that's a
awesome, man.
wild story.
So that's probably a good place to start. Um, how how'd you become a mule guy? Because that's your name's kind of synonymous with mules now.
It is, yeah, and I don't know, that might have started when I was a little kid. Even I don't know how I became a mule guy actually, because I grew up in the outfitting business, and we had a lot of horses and mules, and we had a camp. My dad had a camp, not actually not far, Joe, from where you were working there. We went in Montour Creek, which is right across from Ovando, and went into the Bob Marshall that way. And I always liked the mules for some reason. And as I got a little older, and I just stayed a lot with the mules and horses too. But I suppose I've told people that I'm a little different. Maybe a little too independent, but if all of my friends would have been riding mules, I probably would have rode horses, maybe. But since all my friends were riding horses, why I had to try to make it all work with these mules, and I loved them. I enjoyed them, and so I just kind of stuck with them, I guess, as I was growing up and going on through life.
Hmm. And from there, I guess this is the second half of that question. How'd you end up becoming a clinician? And teaching the kind of horsemanship, mulemanship that we're familiar with. And how was it an easy decision to say I'm going to be? I'm sure you help people with horses, but to say like I'm going to be the mule guy, and you kind of like carved
Yeah,
out a piece of the market for you, for lack of a better term.
yeah, that part was easy because I just like mules. Had some horses, but I like mules. Tried to do everything with mules, and let's see, back in the late '80s, early '90s, I had taken a job out of Toston, Montana, there um, on a piece of property. I wouldn't call it a ranch, but it was a large piece of property, about 23,000 acres. It was all mountain country, and so there's lots of riding there, and mules were came in pretty good there in that mountain country. And one day there in the '90s, um, I got introduced to horsemanship, and I'd been around horses and mules my whole life, and I could ride. I'd started colts, man. I think I started when I was 16 or 17. I was starting colts at home, and but I'd never been introduced to this horsemanship thing. So kind of like you were saying, Joe, I watched back in those days. I watched a videotape, and I just didn't know that this stuff even existed. So um, I started working on that pretty hard and heavy, and got a got some things working for me, and had a pretty nice mule at the time, and got some things working good for this mule that I was riding on an elementary level, but still working well, and people saw that, and there was a mule club actually over here where I'm at now, and that I belong to, and they see me riding this mule, and so they were encouraged me to do a clinic, and I kind of shrugged it off for quite a while, and they kept bugging me about it. So I finally did. I did a little clinic, and it seemed to go well, I guess, and as well as your first clinic could ever go. But there was somebody from Washington that was in that clinic, and they said, "Oh my goodness, you got to come over to our place and do one." So I went over to their place and did one, and somebody else says, "Oh, you got to come over here and do one." I ended up that summer, I did 7 clinics just without even really trying. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool. I kind of liked it. So from then on, I started working toward that, and eventually everything took hold, and that's what I did for 20 years or 21 years was was the clinics. And I figured there was enough horse guys out there doing horses, so the mules needed somebody to speak up for them. So I decided that's what I was going to do.
Hmm.
That's awesome. And it just kind of turned into I guess a career for you if it lasted 20 years.
Yes, it was quite a career. Yep.
So, Brad, something that I'm kind of fascinated with is that you're real interested in making bridle mules. Like, I don't know much about mules. I haven't worked with them, and to be perfectly honest, like I don't have a desire to ride a mule, but not like with prejudice or anything. I'm fascinated with people, so I think it's really neat. The people that obviously love mules, like I love horses, but then you could just be a mule guy, but then you're a bridle mule guy. For you, like, when did that happen? Obviously, you liked mules since you were a little kid, from what you said, but there must have been a certain point where you decided, I want to make a bridle mule. Was there like that must have been pretty daunting to go from just wanting to ride mules to making a bridle mule.
Well, it's a path for sure. And that desire all came from just learning the horsemanship that I suddenly was introduced to one day. Um, but I remember, oh, this was back in the 70s, there, late 70s. I was packing for the Forest Service over on the North Fork District in Idaho. And I was going up a trail one day, and there was an outfitter coming the other way and with a big string of mules, and he was riding a mule. And this guy come by. He was riding a mule, and this mule had a nice silver bit in its mouth, and boy, everything just looked really nice. And I'd never seen anything like that. And so, actually, wouldn't say that I'd ever really rode a mule before that. We had them as pack animals, but we didn't ride them. And there was just something about that picture, and so that was stuck in my mind. And when I got into this horsemanship thing through Buck Brannaman and things, why then that is just part of the culture. And so why couldn't you make a bridal mule? Yeah, or why wouldn't you, for that matter? There was so much to learn there, and I've been eager to learn, and so that was just part of the deal as far as I was concerned.
Did you have anybody make fun of you for riding a mule from, your family or growing up in a culture where you rode horses and packed with mules?
Oh, yeah, occasionally, but once you get those mules working pretty nice, they get kind of quiet, those folks. They don't make too much fun anymore, but but
Yeah.
it's always there.
Yeah. No, that's a neat story, because that reminds me of when I first watched the Buck documentary back in probably like 2016. And there was a moment near the beginning of that documentary, and he was just leading a horse on the end of a lead rope and talking about how a horse ought to be respectful and a horse ought to, be led like he understands his place in life, and it's like a dance. And he was going on and on about all that. And like, I'd never seen anyone just lead a horse like that. And that was kind of my moment of, my big pivotal moment. Probably like you seeing that mule go by with the bridle bit. Only I just wanted to make a horse handy on the end of the halter rope. But because Joe and I, we talked to a lot of people, but that's what we're always fascinated with and try to draw out of folks is like, what is it that compelled you? And then what was that like to trying to pursue it? Because I imagine for a young guy, you see that mule go by with that bit, and and you can't even put your finger on exactly what it is, but you want it. You want to be like that. You want to make something like that. And what was the first thing you did
Yeah.
after that to go in that direction?
Actually, the first thing I did was the only thing I could do at the time. I took one of the pack mules and kind of got him started riding. Didn't have any silver bit at that time or anything, but by golly, I was riding the mule around a little bit anyway. So
Yeah.
um, then, as I went on, got a little older, I got some mules of my own and horses too, and kind of got to riding the mules, like I say, mainly because everybody else was riding a horse, so I had to be a little different. So I was riding a mule and got a couple of good riding mules as that goes. But but the horsemanship thing, and it started, Joe, not unlike what you were telling me. I some friends of mine loaned me Buck Brannaman's horsemanship video, and I knew Buck because this was I was over in the Bozeman area at that time, and Buck was there too, and I knew Buck, and I knew he'd done a some kind of a movie or something, and but I got to watch this video, and so it starts out, and he's riding around on this horse, and all of a sudden I realized what was taking place, and I grabbed the controls and I stopped the thing and I rewound it and I started it again and rewound it and started again. I thought, well, he's not using any hands. He's just riding around with his seat or legs or something. And I just couldn't believe anything like that could be possible. So I thought, well, I got to learn all this. So then I bought every videotape he's ever made and, and and studied them like a college course. And so it just, well, I got really hooked on it. So, but everybody's got a moment, where something really fascinates you, and it just, I don't know, it clicks a switch, and away you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's also a common theme with the people we talk to, whether they're pursuing making bridle horses and this style of horsemanship, and or we've had other people who are pursuing other things with horses, maybe other disciplines. But anyone who ends up being kind of accomplished at what they're doing, they seem to have pivotal moments like that where they're like, "Oh, this is my direction," and it
Sure.
instills a real confidence in them.
Yeah. Yes. And it's, for me, it was at just the right time in life, and whatever it opened some doors there to go through and move on, and I'm glad it did.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
sounds like it ended up being fruitful and opened up. You know, that the coolest thing about clinics too, especially if you're from a rural area, from all the clinicians we've talked to, is it opens you up to travel a lot and see places you kind of have no other business going to.
for sure, yeah, yep. And
What was
it's
it?
interesting. It's you get going, and you drive by a lot of really interesting looking things, and you think, well, by golly, next year we'll stop there. But I got to keep going now. But the traveling it's an interesting thing. I love to travel, and it's fun to see in lots of parts of the world. Wasn't real big on traveling back east though, but it's ooh, that traffic's never ending. But especially out west, you get a little break from that once in a while. A lot of cool places out there though.
So what was the amount of time between, settling on the mule path and wanting to pursue that, and then when you felt ready to do clinics and start helping people? How much time did you get to kind of just work on it and practice and screw up a bunch of
Well,
mules, I guess?
don't remember the exact timeline there, but there was 2 or 3 years where I worked pretty hard at it, and I was starting colts of my own and start them, get them going, and sell them. And I'd sit there and I'd watch Buck Brannaman's colt starting videotape. I'd watch it, and I'd think, okay, I got it. Out to the round pen, get going on a colt, and geez, they'd blow up and buck me off or something. And I thought, okay, maybe I missed something. So I go back in, study it some more, and then, okay, I got it. You eventually you see a little thing that you missed the first time because you weren't ready to see it, I think. And so the more I did, the more I was ready to see, and the more I was ready to see, the more they helped. And but then it was probably 2 or 3 years, and then I did that first clinic, and like I say, it was really on an elementary level. There were so many more things to learn, but I had some basics down at that point in time, and I kind of drug my feet on doing that clinic because I thought that I was probably the last person in the world to pick up on this. Everybody else probably knew it, but turns out they didn't, so it worked out okay. But then it's after that started, then it's an ever ending work to improve yourself and what you do and how you do it. And if you're going to be an effective person doing clinics and teaching people, you have to keep on improving yourself. Otherwise, it's not going to last long. So,
Yeah. Yeah. You can't get stale because eventually you'll kind of, like, if you're not getting better, you'll run out of things to teach almost, you know,
yes, yeah.
and your insight will, if you keep learning, your insight continues to have more and more value to the people you're helping.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can stay at a basic level, and that's all you're ever going to be is pretty basic. So, a person in a situation like that, especially, really needs to keep learning and keep improving and keep trying new things and sorting out what works and what doesn't work, and then you're the most help to others, and you really benefit yourself as well as you go along with that. I don't teach clinics or anything anymore, but I'm still, every time I get on one and ride, I'm still improving a little bit, trying to improve a little bit what I do and how I do it, and be a little smoother, maybe do a little less or whatever. But it's always there. You just can't help it not be there.
Yeah.
In all of your experience working with folks, what do you think is harder for folks to work with, a horse or a mule?
Oh, I think a mule is harder for people to work with, um, because mules have so many more ideas, it seems, than horses. I don't mean to knock the horse any, but you present something to the mule, and he's, well, okay, but what about this? Okay, but what about this? But what about this? And a horse kind of, they kind of go along with things maybe a little bit more. It just seems like the mules have a lot more ideas. You have to keep presenting through those and work through their ideas to where your idea finally is the one they choose, where a horse may not have quite so many ideas to work through. Um, and the mule's sense of self-preservation is pretty strong. That that I believe that's the people refer to it as stubbornness. We've all heard that, but I think it's just a pretty good level of self-preservation. The mule, he's always kind of looking out for himself, and is this really going to work for him? And more than he's interested in whether it's going to work for you.
Hmm. Yeah, I remember hearing that. I think it was Tom Dorrance used to refer to himself as the lawyer for the horse. I imagine working with mules, he probably felt like that a lot, probably more so than somebody that works with horses. And like I ride, horses for folks, and more, they probably think I'm just kind of rude but I'm just quiet. I don't say a lot to them because you get that all the time. People come to you with a horse, and it's this and it's that. And I had a lady not too long ago, her horse got injured here, and it got healed up and stuff. But I heard through the grapevine that she's waiting for him to heal up so she can have it come to Jesus with him for getting himself hurt, and just stuff like that. And you just think, what kind of idiots are they? And then
Well,
more and more when people are like, well, what do you think about that horse? Or is he nice? Or they call you a week later, what do you think about my horse? Like, oh, he's sweet. He's great. He's coming along. He's doing fine, you know. And they're all sweet. Like more and more, every horse I work with is like a confirmation to me that every horse is good and has like no problems really of his own. It's just
sure.
us. And I can imagine, boy, with especially the comments you hear about horses, I imagine. Now, granted, I'm sure mule folks that are in it because they love mules are more kind to the mule. But the way horse folks talk about mules, I can imagine you'd have to be a real lawyer for the mule and constantly be saying,
Yeah,
hey, look, man,
sometimes.
that's not his fault. You're the one causing most of this. Like I heard a story, a saying one time about mules, and it was that the difference between a mule and a horse is that if you were to put a horse in a trailer and go down the road and have an accident, in the future, that horse will be kind of worried about the trailer, probably not load too well, and you have to get him over that. Now, you do the same thing with a mule, you go down the road, get in an accident, he'll load just fine next time. He just might not load if you're trying to load him because he'll know you were the guy driving the truck.
Yeah, it's amazing what they do know, really. Um, and retain. Their retention is amazing. Um, and quite honestly, I haven't worked with enough horses over the years to maybe theirs is quite amazing as well. But I do know the mule's retention to things, good or bad, is amazing. So that's why you want to get as much good stuff in there as possible because it'll be there.
Yeah, and with horses,
Yeah,
we're always talking about like the capacity horses have to give you a second chance, I guess would be the best way to put it, you know, to just
Sure.
kind of cover for your sins and forgive you. But I mean, I imagine a mule must hold on to that stuff a little bit more. But have you come across many mules, if any, where you just kind of told the customer or yourself, it was a mule maybe you had, and you just said, look, this mule isn't going to cut it. He needs to get turned out or go live in the hills or something. But it's just a waste of anyone's time to mess with this thing.
Occasionally, you get one that'll be so mistreated and mistrustful, and that self-preservation level's pretty high, and he's learned how to take care of himself. And boy, they can be dangerous once in a while. I mean, that's not very often that they're that bad, but they can. There's the other saying is there's nothing better than a good mule, or there's nothing worse than a bad one, and they can because they're pretty accurate when they self-preservation kicks in, and whoever is walking up to them is going to be the cause of pain and anguish. They can take care of themselves now. So, but most of the time it's just people are a little too forceful, a little too strong-handed, and so mules learn to brace against these things. And if you just kind of show them another way, why a mule's pretty happy that somebody finally learned that a lot of times, and they can come around pretty good. But it's hard for people to get it. I mean, I understand that before I learned anything, I would have been hard for me to get it. It was hard for me to get it once I learned it. So uh, it can be difficult for people, and that's at least they're trying though. If they're trying, they'll get somewhere.
yeah. I There's a multitude of good mule sayings. I've heard old farriers around this part of the world say things like a mule will be good 30 days just to kick you at the end of the month and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, to wait and get even with you and things like that. Fortunately, they
Yeah.
don't have the mental capacity for that, or they'd be running the world and we'd be working for them. But yeah, there's all kinds of interesting sayings and ideas and beliefs. But fortunately, it's most of it is not that way.
Boy, what fascinated me about mules in the little time I spent with them, I worked with a family in Colorado that had a a guest ranch, and we ran about 35 head of trail horses, and we had, I think, 4 mules. And we would have those black bears, coming onto the ranch looking for leftover scraps and stuff like that from the campers. And so usually around 5 o'clock in the evening, almost every day, you'd have a couple bears come out, and they'd waller through the meadow down there below the horse pasture. And all the horses would get up on the close side of the horse pasture and be snorting and looking. And those mules would all point their ears at the bear and just go confidently walking right down to the edge of the fence, like they were going to get as close to that bear as they could. And we had one crazy Mustang that would go with them. But it was real neat how their attitude to danger was totally different. I mean, they were like,
Sure.
let us out of here. We'll go catch that thing. Where the horses were the opposite, completely the opposite.
Yeah, a lot of that comes from the donkey side of things. The donkeys, they don't have a lot of flight necessarily with them, and in the wild, they'll stand and fight something if they have to, and a lot of that comes through on the mule, and with anything like a bear or something a little smaller. And it's one of the things that makes him pretty darn good at working cattle, really, is that instinct to go after something. And as well, you get a mule working cattle now, and I'll tell you what, it's a wonderful thing. All you do is you just get it out of the way, and once they understand how to move and what it is you're looking for, and things will happen.
Oh, I bet. So it's a jack and a mare that make a mule, right?
Correct. Yes.
So the opposite, is that called a henny?
It is.
Okay. Have you worked with any of those?
If I have, it's only because someone said that it was a henny. I never knew for a fact that one was or saw any physical differences between what was supposed to be a henny or a mule or anything. But according to what I've been told a couple of times, I guess I have worked with a few, but um, to me, there wasn't any difference. So,
yeah. I mean, I guess they just don't, it's less common to breed them that way. Just
it is, yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, it's pretty hard for things to connect there, I guess, for some reason.
Yeah, probably size difference being one of them.
It would be, yeah.
Huh.
So let me ask you this, Brad, because I'd be very curious to get your 2 cents. Because unlike Ben, eventually down the line on my bucket list is to get a few mules to ride. Right now, I have horses. We've got some mules on the ranch here, but they're all draft animals. They're all Percheron mules that pull carts and hay wagons and stuff like that. But I'd be curious to get your 2 cents on, if you want a good riding mule, is there kind of a formula for that? Because it seems like even more so than horses, getting a right jack and mare combination can prove difficult at times.
Oh, it can at times, but that formula has already been uh, solved and created. There's so many mules out there anymore, and a lot of people breeding mules, and nice jacks with good saddle type mares is the ideal thing. I wouldn't recommend a big, heavy boned jack that is more prone to throw work animals as a riding jack, because it just kind of too big and too heavy. But little lighter jacks and little freer with their feet and moving and things like that, with some type of nice saddle type mare is a good combination, regardless of your breed of choice as far as the horse goes. But there's some people out there that have got that dialed in, and there's really a lot of nice saddle mules being bred and being offered out there.
Mm.
And you'd look for one of those just like you'd look for a good horse, saddle horse. Conformation, disposition, size, color last. But
So what would kind of an ideal size jack be? Because I don't go around and look at many donkeys, so I don't know what like a good jack from a bad jack would be. And maybe one day when I go to buy a colt, I'll get it from one of these places you're talking about. But I'd still be curious to know like the kind of the exact prototype jack you're talking about.
oh, some maybe 15 hands or a little shorter, 14.3 to 15 hands, something like that. That's a little lighter boned. Some of these big mammoth jacks that they breed for work stock, they're big, heavy-legged, heavy-footed jacks, and something that's just a little lighter all the way around. Um, and an important thing is how they move. I'd like to see a jack move pretty light on his feet, and not all of them do, because that's what you're going to want to have come through on your mule when you breed it to a mare is something it's light on its feet, it's athletic, um, and so that's an important thing to look at on a jack. Most people wouldn't maybe think about that, but from the horsemanship aspect, that would be something that I would certainly look at as well as size.
Gotcha. And so if you have that 14.3, 15 hand jack, what are you thinking size wise for a mare? Just if you have the mare be a bridle horse, like that kind of, like for example, I'm 6'3", so my personal horses, I like them to be about 15.3, 16 hands.
Sure. So with that, that's what you'd look for is the horse that you're comfortable riding. And so I'm not quite that tall. So I'd be looking at about a 15 hand mare. But it just depends on what a person likes. I've had some mules that are 16 2 hands and but they're even though they're tall, they're lighter and pretty light in the feet. And well, the one mule I took him a lot on the road, had him for a long time. He always a nice bridle mule, and he could do a lot of nice stuff at 16 2 hands. So it just, as far as the mare goes, you're just looking for the type of horse that you like to ride.
Makes sense. So, and I guess this is just a shameless plug for somebody. If someone wanted to go out today and get them a colt to turn into a bridle mule, uh, where in the country would they look? Like, what are some of the good breeders doing a good job today, in your opinion?
Well, to be honest with you, I've kind of been out of that game for enough years now that I'm not really sure who's out there doing what. As far
Gotcha.
as a good breeder. So I know there's some folks over in Idaho there, those Heart B mules. They're pretty fine saddle mules. They've been breeding them for a long time. Um, and oh, there. But as far I, and especially back in like your part of the world, I haven't been back there for so long. I'm kind of out of touch with it really as to who's doing what and on that kind of thing.
Sure. Sure. Well, that's fair. That's totally fair. Yeah, I think I told Ben this story once, but if I have it my way, I'll live a really long time and make a lot of bridle horses. And good Lord willing, that might happen. Maybe it won't. But one of those bridle horses, I'd like to just make a bridle mule, just so it's be like, yeah, I can say I made a bridle mule because it's just something. Maybe I have kind of that same gene in me where I'd like to be a little different sometimes. So one day I was sitting with Kaylee, my girlfriend, and I was just kind of like daydreaming, and I can't remember what we were doing, but she's like, "What are you thinking about? You're like really zoning it." And I'm like, "You don't want to know what I'm thinking about." And she's like, "No, tell me." And I said, "Well, I was thinking like I want to be able to do this for a long time, and I still want to be able to start colts when I'm older, but I don't really want to, you know, be on the ground when I get into my 60s. I want to be able to rope them for something off of something solid. So if I could live like into my if I could live to like 90 years old, then I by the time I get to like 62, 63, I need to think about buying a mule colt so I can start it and then have it be a bridle horse by the time I'm in like my mid to late 60s. And then in my 70s, I just got that bridle mule to rope all the colts off of, and I won't have to worry about things. And Kaylee goes, "You're right. I didn't want to know what you were thinking about." But I was trying to work out the timeline of that mule, and it's one of those best laid plans of mice and men thing. But I'm like, man, if I could get one handy then, and then just in my 70s have something really reliable to rope everything off of, I wouldn't have to be on the ground in my 70s trying to deal with colts. So, it might be a pie in the sky idea, but that's my plan for mules right now anyway.
You might try to up that a few years, because if you get to working with a mule and get a mule coming along really good, that might make you that much better with the horses.
Yeah.
Speculation.
Yeah, we'll see. I gotta make bridle, like I gotta make the horses I have bridle horses first before I buy any more stock. But yeah.
That does make sense though,
Yeah.
Brad, because like a lot of things we work on in life, like literally anything you work on in life, if you can find the hardest, with knowledge, of course, if you can find like the hardest approach and practice it, your weakness, you practice your weakness or the difficult angle to that thing, then it's going to make you better at, just the generalness of the thing you're working on. That was a pretty screwed up way to say it all, but basically, like a basketball player, if they're right-handed, they're going to shoot left-handed hoops, or, if you're, I guess working with horses, like, I guess if you're roping, right, and you can rope, you can throw an overhand and a hula hand and really look sharp, but you cannot heel a calf. Well, you don't need to be out there practicing an overhand shot. You need to just practice a trap shot till you got it, 100 out of 100. So maybe that is something to that there, that a horseman ought to get a mule and work with it.
Yeah.
And it would probably even change his empathy towards a horse. Because that seems like the biggest part of working with horses is that not so much just muscle memory or anything like that, but really your mindset and like your empathy towards the animal you're working with. Like we were talking about earlier, that it's easy to sit around and quote Ray Hunt and Tom Dorrance and say, yeah, it's never the horse, it's always the person. And you can say all these things, but to really understand that and feel that and work with the horse and realize, yeah, it really is not him. I mean, it is. It's a culmination of his experiences and your lack of knowledge that's causing him to act a certain way. It's coming out of him, but it's really not going to be fixed by thinking it's him. It's going to be fixed by, getting help and gaining some skills and realizing it's up to you and your ability to present something to him in a different way. And so maybe working with a mule would help quite a few people to really get that deep down in them, that like, hey, I've got to become a better hand. I've got to feel back to this thing, or I've got to slow down or be more accurate. Because horses, it's amazing how much horses cover for people. The average horse can put up with some real chicanery and get along. And people, you see it all the time. People have horses for sale advertised as, been ridden extensively under saddle, and they pass it to the next person and it's bucking them off. Because for some reason, they just kind of got along with that person and they thought they were doing great, and they give it to the next person, and he's not any better or any worse than they are, but he just feels different to them, and they're getting bucked off, and they think they bought a bad horse. And all they did is just bought a horse they didn't know anything, that just kind of got along with that person and
Sure.
just kind of doesn't get along with them. And so trainers
Yeah.
get that horse and then they're like, well, I'll fix it for you. But they don't always take into account, like, wait a minute, there's nothing wrong with this horse. I just have to start over from the beginning and, offer it something real and something, offer some understanding and yeah, that's, I never thought of that. Maybe a mule would be good for me or a lot of other people.
Totally would be. There was a
Hmm.
there was a time when I first started doing clinics and started doing a colt starting class in the clinics there. For a few years, I did all the starting because it was just 2-day thing, Saturday, Sunday, and I'd get all the colts saddled Saturday morning and ride them all Sunday morning, and then hand them back and say thanks for coming. And so that was, I don't know how many of those actually went on, but I got to a point where I had to change things up a little bit and got the participants a little more involved in the colt starting. And then eventually I added an extra day to the colt starting class, or 4 days. And I had the participants do everything with them. And I just did little unless I had to step in. And it was amazing to me when I started doing that, that people would bring their mule and they'd have to saddle it and they'd have to gentle it and, get it sacked out and ride it and teach it all these things. And the stuff people could get away with their own mule. And the mule's just like, oh yeah, he does that all the time. It's not a big deal. And if I'd have stepped in and done something like that, oh man, he'd have snorted and jumped sideways. But I always got a kick out of that because the mule would just be like, oh well, yeah, okay. And the people that had the mule could get away with so much more things than a stranger could have, just because the mule was used to them and knew that they were okay. They weren't gonna hurt him or anything, and the mule just kind of go along with it. And it was really an interesting thing to see and watch.
Hmm.
That definitely happens. Like I didn't realize it until you just said that, but some of these horses I ride for folks, and then the person comes and sees their horse and wants to ride their horse and stuff, and even just like, maybe it's a really touchy horse, but this person's just kind of like fumbling around on the ground or doesn't have their lead rope and their flag situated and all, and and I was like, man, that thing would paw my head off if I just like dropped all that crap right under its nose, And yeah, that's a really good point. I don't think I don't think that's registered that much to me until you just said it. But that does happen quite a bit. There's a lot of grace involved there, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah. I mean, you work to get them handier, the owners handier with things and whatnot, and the mule appreciates that, or the horse as well. But it was always amazing to me what they could, and people weren't getting away with it. They just didn't know. And the mule is just like, oh yeah, here we go again. It'll be okay.
Yeah. 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 There must be some actual, matrix to the inner workings of it all. But the way it manifests a lot of times is basically the more knowledge you have, the higher the standard the animal holds you to. And the dumber you are, the more they kind of keep you safe. Like the old saying, God looks out for fools and drunks and children or
Yes.
something. Or they tailor that to a lot of different demographics. But it kind of like that with horses, that if you don't know anything, you kind of get by, and then the more you know, the more you've got to stay true to that, or you'll get kicked or bucked off or drug or something. But all this talk about mule training actually reminded me, last year I had a lady that wanted to send a couple mules to me from Alabama, and we were talking about it back and forth, and she led with, do you work with mules? And I said, no, I haven't, but I work with horses, but I'm fairly confident, things would go all right. I'll probably call some people I know, and I'll just learn as I go. It'd be great for both of us. And she was like, cool, I'm good with that. And then, but then a few months later, before she was going to bring him, she called me back and said that she had found an actual mule trainer and he had a sooner availability. So she was going to go with him. And, but I liked how she kind of said an actual mule trainer. And I was like, hey, good deal. You know, that's all right. And actually at the time,
Yeah.
I'll be honest, at the time I kind of went like, well, good deal. I didn't want to, you know, I didn't need that anyway. But now I'm kind of like, shoot, I missed out. But I loved her actual mule trainer remark because I was thinking, oh, good for him. I'm an actual horse trainer. Hope she's listening. But no hard feelings. But what did you ever have that happen with folks sending you horses where you're like, well, you know, I actually work with mules, or did you just accept horses and people would send them to you?
Oh, I took in a few horses, yeah, and then when I was starting colts and whatnot, I did take in a few horses, and but when I started doing the clinics, I would not take horses in the clinic because I figured there's enough guys out there doing horse clinics. You need to go there. And
Yeah.
as over time, I softened up a little bit, and if somebody wanted to bring a horse, I'd go ahead and let them bring a horse. But there for a while, I was pretty stiff about that. But and actually, I guess I was invited and I went to the Tom Dorrance Benefit Clinic in Fort Worth there, and it was the only mule there. And so, and I thought, man, this is a big deal. I brought my best mule, my best saddle, my best dog, and everything else because when you're in with a crowd like that, and you're the only guy riding a mule, boy, you want things to go pretty smooth, and it did. It went pretty good, and people were kind of impressed with that, I guess. And there was for a little while there, I had some people approach me about doing a horse clinic, and I did a few of those. And I didn't run back home to Montana and drop my mules off and grab a horse and go do it. I just show up with my mules and do some horse clinics, and that was okay. And they died out pretty fast, but it softened me up. And I thought, well, if somebody wants to bring a horse to a clinic, then that's okay. It's not a big deal. And it wasn't. It wasn't a big deal at all. But
I think Buck he lets people bring a mule to a clinic occasionally.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but that was kind of nice for you because you probably were trying to. Yeah, that's kind of nice for you because you're probably trying to be, like you said, there was enough guys doing horse clinics, so that's kind of an easy out. You could just do mules, and you weren't really stepping on anyone's toes or feeling like you were being disrespectful or anything. Like you could just kind of take what you were learning, take it right into the mule industry, go back, learn from Buck and people like that, and kind of be a great outreach to the mule community. Because I've heard your name quite a bit. Of course, I'm not in the mule world, so I don't know the particulars, but I've heard your name mostly through your website and what you do now, bridle horse shop. But as far as the mule community, when I have heard about mule trainers, mostly it's your name that comes up.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I first met Buck Brannaman, he made the comment because I asked him about riding horses for the public, and I still had my kind of 9-to-5 job, and I had no idea how green I was. But this is the first Buck clinic I ever went to, and I asked him about mules because I just asked. I didn't say like, oh well, I've started a mule, yada yada yada. I said, well, what about mules? What, like, if someone wants to have me work with a mule, what do you suggest? And he's like, well, first off, you treat them exactly the same. And he said, but if you're just starting out riding horses for the public, I'd avoid them. And I didn't want to tell him like, well, I've already, started a mule, and I didn't realize, how kind of an ordinary job I did. But I was like, okay. And, after I've done this a couple years, and I have worked with a couple mules for clients, just a couple, but I think part of that was it's with the mule, like you said, they have so many different ideas. It's kind of helpful for you to be really firm in your belief. Like I imagine it would be hard for me to take someone else's mule that maybe has like had a problem or something like that, watch a video and be like, okay, this new stuff, let's see if it works. And then you go to try to implement on that on a mule, and they've probably learned, 5 different like evasion techniques to figure all this out anyway. And then you go, well, it's like, well, clearly none of that stuff works. Whereas maybe you're starting on like a gentle horse who's like, okay, yeah, all right, I'll roll my hind this way. Okay. And now I'll put the front end over here. Yeah. Okay. You're kind of figuring some stuff out. Um, I think that was part of it, because now that I'm a little more firm in my beliefs that I know how this works, and I'm a little more confident to stick with it, or maybe just change my approach just a little bit to kind of fit the animal. Now I feel like I can get around mule colts and get them started, and it's not the end of the world. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who can start them better than I can, but I feel like I can be safe and get a change where however many years ago that was, I don't know that I would have been able to do that. I think I might have just given up, to tell you the truth.
Well, that's a good possibility because we've all had to learn and figure out how much is enough. And and or another part of that is, how long is this going to take? How many times am I going to have to keep repeating this? And it takes a person a while to figure that out. You got to have some successes at that to understand how long and and how to present things. And if you're starting out with a mule and you don't understand that, you probably won't hang in there long enough. And that's, a person ends up just throwing their hands in the air and saying, the heck with it. And because I'm, that's a big thing, is knowing how long to hang in there till you get a change. And what is a change? You know, Oftentimes with a horse, when a horse kind of comes through, oh geez, they just sigh and their head hangs and their mouth goes and everything. And if the mule can make the same change, and he might just kind of lick his lips a little. And so then you're going, okay, was that it? Should I stop there? Should I do more? And if you're unsure about it, at least with me, I always figured, I'll do a little more. Well, that's where I learned was by you do too much to learn where you should have stopped, and that happens. You do too much, and then you go, oh geez, I should have quit back then. But so a person should have some experience with that and a pretty good understanding of that before you take on a mule, because you'd have more success with the mule.
Yeah. Yeah. Our a guy who helps Ben and I quite a bit, Bill Barnes, the way he described it is sometimes the only way where the edge is to go over it.
Yep. And
Yeah.
we would never do that
definitely
intentionally, but in experimenting and trying to figure it out, you do go over the edge. But boy, that's when you really learned where the edge was that time.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, or I guess, I know Bill says the only way to know what too much is to do too much. So maybe you don't actually go over the edge, but you have to at least get up there and almost fall off and have a friend, grab you and pull you back up. But if you're just cowering back, like, well, I think the edge is up there somewhere, but I don't want to risk getting close. Yeah. I don't want to, have any scary moments. Then you'll never know where it is. You might be 100 miles from it. It's like this one time in Montana, me and this new guy, he was actually an ex Amish kid, Eldon Yoder, totally Amish, right? And So he showed up at the ranch. He wanted to be a cowboy, and he had been there about a week. And they sent us out one morning around like 5 a.m. We were going to go sit at the back of this pasture, and we were going to gather these cattle and move them. So we were the 2 youngest guys, and we kind of got the grunt work that morning. So we rode out to the back of this pasture, and we thought we could see these trees. So we figured we were at the back of the pasture, and we kind of rode out there, and we must have been being kind of lazy because we got, settled down in our spot, and we're waiting for the sun to come up and for the boss to call over the walkie-talkie when to start moving the cattle. And right as the sun cracked up, we looked behind us, and we were probably about a half a mile from the back of the pasture. We hadn't even made it all the way there. And so then we had to go ride through more cattle to get to the back. But we were just worried about, being way out there by ourselves and, running into a fence in the dark, whatever. And I think about that all the time because that's kind of like how horses are for me sometimes. I don't really want to get into something that might be over my head. So I'll stay, like, not just this side of trouble, but I stay way this side of discovery almost. Like, I'm like, well, like I'll do that with client horses sometimes, I'll get a horse out and maybe he's in to get started, and I'll start working with him that day. And I think, well, yeah, I've got a couple changes. That's good. But really a lot of times I'll just kind of stay where it's real comfortable and I won't do anything. I guess it's the line between doing, getting a good change and putting them away and then doing way too much where you just blow them up. But it's easy sometimes to think, well, everything stayed calm and that's pretty good. You put them away. But then all you've done is the same thing for like a week in a row. You're not really, checking out what you did yesterday and then seeing if you can make a little change in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's sort of like us that morning on that dark morning. We're like, well, I think that's the woods. We'll just turn around and sit here and chat for a half hour instead of like really going and checking if that was the fence or not. And same with that horse, got a horse you're going to start and you're like, well, he did pretty good. On to the next one instead of like, oh, well, okay, that checked out fine. What's next on my list? What's the next thing that I could be starting to push on and working with him next on? And really, it's not so much the horse. A lot of times it's me. It's an area of my life I don't really want to grow into. I want to stay in the stuff that kind of feels good to me, the stuff I feel confident at. And it's not that the horse isn't ready. Sometimes I'm not ready or I'm not good at it, but I'm ready to work on it. And I need to just push myself in that area and be like, all right, this horse is kind of waiting for me to ante up and take him to the next point. And I need to get out of my comfort zone.
Sure. And that's a good thing to really understand about yourself. A person has to understand himself in order to help the horses or mules or improve yourself as well. And kind of got to know your weaknesses and figure out how to work on past that. So it's good to realize that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you can't be perfect, at least be self-aware.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's a real gift that we have getting to work with animals like we do, because gosh, I mean, I'm sure there'd be something out there for us if it wasn't this, and everybody finds something that helps them along their way. But the horses sure give us a window into a lot of things about our personality and the way we even treat others, relationships and stuff like that.
Oh, sure. Sure. Yeah.
The way it comes out, it's great. It's really, we're kind of lucky, right? Because you could go through life and have to learn it through all your relationships with people. And instead you get to figure out some of this stuff in a round corral all by yourself. And so sure, you might piss a bunch of horses and mules off, but at least other people don't have to bear the brunt of that or find out. You get to kind of work on yourself. You spend a week working with a horse and you think, gosh, I bet I would do that with people. And then you get to come back to civilization and treat people a little bit different because of the way you've been practicing your character and the way you treat people on horses.
And it's amazing that it works with people. Some of those same principles.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Comes down to presentation.
Yeah.
That's how you deal with horses, how you deal with people. I I've had to come a long way with that with people. I do not give the best presentation sometimes. I'm 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 bad about I guess they got lots of names for it, but I'm bad about seeming very aggravated and disinterested in whatever's going on or maybe a conversation. And it doesn't mean I am that way, but I've realized that about myself, and the horses have kind of helped me with that too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I do that too, Joe. Like where a horse will be troubled about something, and like they kind of need you to like pay attention and get very present and just work with something menial with them. And instead, I'm kind of like, no, we're doing something else today. Kind of like with a person, or like someone kind of needs you to get present and listen to them or something, and you kind of mentally go somewhere else and you just shut them off and you're like, look, man, come on, man, I got better things to do. And the horses will do the same thing where they're like, hey, man, I need you to, I know it seems dumb to you, but this is life changing to me. I need your help. And we're like trying to go on and rope a calf or go do canter transitions, or like we want to go do something else. And the horse needs us to come back to earth and like sit there and like do lateral flexion, sitting still or something. Right. And, that's I guess that's just something you pick up over the years, but boy, I do that all the time. I want to go to the moon, and the horse needs me to just like sit there and do nothing but think and spend time with him.
Well, you guys probably got a while, I'm guessing, to get to this, but when the time comes, it really works well on children. I could do that stuff with my boys, and it works really well. It's so little piece of advice there, I guess. Try that when the time comes. But that horsemanship stuff, it works good on kids.
Yeah, we'll keep that in mind.
that's funny. Yeah, keep that.
Yeah. And something else too, Brad, I wanted to ask you about is just like with all this stuff we're talking about. I don't know how much you got to spend time working with mules, like around other people, or if you were working by yourself. But I'm sure you went through just hard times where you're thinking, "Gosh, should I even be doing this?" And I know Joe and I, like, we kind of go through that. We're both like pretty stubborn, probably pretty ornery people. So like, we're pretty stubborn to a fault. Probably comes out in other areas of our life, but that probably helps us. So even though we have like the wanting to give up days, we to our own detriment are just kind of like very stubborn people. But I'm sure other people struggle with that too. And like, what kept you going through some of those days where I'm sure you must have had those days where you think, gosh, maybe there's something else there for me, or maybe this is for me, but maybe I need to do it at a different level because this is dang hard, or, whatever the thoughts are that plague you. And you just think, man, I don't know if I want to do this or not. Did you have that? Like what got you through those kind of times?
Oh, well, there were those days. And there were times, especially maybe with a specific animal, where we were talking about a few minutes ago there, where I just think, geez, I wish I hadn't learned so much, because if I was back where I didn't know anything, this would all be simple, but now it's complicated. And, but it was, once I got started doing that, it was something I wanted to do. That's just all there was to it. And so there were hard days, and there were days where you wondered about your sanity for doing that, but just find ways around it, and keep pursuing what you want to pursue there, because I mean, it's in your heart, that's the thing, it's in your heart, and so you have to keep doing it. I know there was a lot of guys that I knew that were pretty good hands with the horses, and they wanted to crack out and do clinics and whatnot. And they asked me, what's it take to do that? And said, well, my advice is always that the first thing you need to do is you need to be prepared to starve to death for a while. And I'm like, oh, well, I don't think I want to do that. And they never really got anywhere because they weren't prepared to starve to death for a while. And I mean, I can remember early on, you going down the road, and you pull into some old fairgrounds someplace and put your stock in a pen and, pull a cooler out and have a, can of beanie weenies and a beer. That was dinner. And then the next day you're off down the road again and hoping that you get enough money out of that next clinic to get the gas and pay a few bills at home and eventually it all works out. But if it's in your heart and you want to do it bad enough, you'll figure out a way to keep going. That's
Hmm.
even on those days where you wonder.
It's funny, Brad. I I understand you're just like everyone else where you have those moments of doubt, but just the couple times I've talked to you, you just seem like such a calm, go with the flow type person. You're like, "Oh yeah, well, that happens." And then you keep going. So I understand that happened, but it's just kind of makes me chuckle thinking about seeing you maybe flustered or having some self
Well,
doubt right now.
well, it wasn't always that easy going. So, you know, as I got along in life and you get a little older, then things aren't such a big deal as they are when you're a young guy, it seems like. And but yeah, I look back, I wasn't always that easy going as I am now, um, but the well, the mule did teach me patience, and that's a good thing to have at times. So they did teach me patience for sure, um, but yeah, being a little more easygoing and working, through little problems that maybe at one point in time would a big deal. You realize at this point in time in my life, it's really not a big deal at all. It's just work around it. So it's a good thing to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you said you grew up, doing like packing and stuff like that. And I don't have a ton of experience packing, but I know enough people to do it to know what all goes into it. And I imagine if you're growing up doing that, by the time you got to horsemanship, you were at least equipped with quite a bit of mental fortitude to be able to do something like that because packing and doing it well and consistently, it's not exactly for the faint of heart. You kind of have to have some gur about you to get that done.
Yeah, that's probably a good point. I started riding when I was, big enough to crawl over the fence and get on an old paint horse and ride around. So, and then the outfitting and things, that just suited me just right because we're in the woods all the time and had stock. I always wanted to be a cowboy, but outfitting wasn't really a cowboy kind of a deal. But by golly, I was riding horses, and so that was pretty close. And but just doing that kind of thing, and you're out in the wilderness, and you have a wreck, a mule and the string blows up or something happens, and so then you're there and you're the only one there, and so you have to take care of it and get everything put back together and have the wherewithal, I guess, to kind of stay calm and not panic and just get things put back together and go on. So I having a lot of experience with that probably did help me quite a bit later on. I never thought about it that way, but it probably did.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it just, I think, you see it in ranch kids or kids that spend a lot of time outdoors, or there's a lot of different ways to get that. But there's some ways of growing up that just tend to equip people with a lot of mental
Sure.
fortitude. Um, and I'm not kind of the anecdotal evidence I have is, I grew up as like a farm kid, ranch kid, whatever you want to call it. But we're in an area where there's a lot of, like, we're near a university. So there's a lot of kids I went to high school with that like grow up in suburbs, and their parents are, doing other stuff besides working outside all day. And it's some of them you could tell like their parents kind of exposed them and instilled that work ethic and stuff like that. But if we ever got into growing up, if there were ever situations like we did a lot of backpacking because we're really close to the Appalachian Trail, like, and you get rained on, you get snowed on, stuff like that, and like just junk would happen. And if you don't kind of grow up with just those things happening, and then you just have to keep going, it's hard to learn those lessons later in life. But if it's from the get-go, that's kind of your reality. We have to get this job done, we got to get this fixed. There's no safety net. It's just you. That can be hard for people to learn later in life, but as a kid, when it's just reality, you kind of just adapt that. And that's at least been my thought on it. And I'm by no means think I'm tougher than anyone else or have more mental fortitude, but I know at a young age I was taught, well, you've got to get this job done, and it doesn't really matter if it's 3 p.m. or 11 o'clock at night. We have to finish this job.
Yeah, no, that's a good way of looking at it because is when you're a kid, not too much has happened in life, so it's not a big deal. But as you get older and things happen in life, then you get, if you don't have some of that, people get full of apprehension. And when you're a kid growing up, you don't have any apprehension really. And but when people get apprehension, that's what holds them back. And by going through little things, like that when you're a kid and learning, yeah, I'm going to be like dad or whatever. I gotta work on through this and get through this. And it's a good training ground for life because it's just like a horse. If you can show a horse that there's nothing he can't do, then he'll try as hard as he can try to do what you need him to do. But if you go the other way and you keep shutting the horse down and he feels like he can't accomplish anything, well, you're not going to have much of a horse after a while. So it's kind of the same principle.
Yeah.
It all goes back to horsemanship.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah, boy, it seems like a lot of people too get into this and they want to be elite, be a great horseman, but they don't work at it that hard. Like we're used to thinking about higher education as somebody going to Harvard or Yale, and they're working hard and they got to put in the extra time and it takes years, and they come out the other side with a great piece of paper and they can go on and get a great job. And then your average person getting into horses thinks, well, I'm just going to be a horse trainer. That'd be fun. Be kind of easy. But to really be great, like you got to put in more time than the guy at Harvard or Yale or any other big university.
Yeah.
And you've got to do it all on your own budget, and you got to do it after hours and before hours. And like you said, you got to be willing to starve a bit. And I see it all the time. I get to be around people that ride, and you'll see, you'll see all kind of time during the day where it's, perfect time to go get a horse and practice some stuff. And instead of, just sitting around and not doing that. And, and everybody's got to pursue it at their own ambition. But yeah, to really be great, you got to put in the time. And just because it's working with horses or mules doesn't make it any less than any of the things we think of as great arts or endeavors. It still takes time, and it still takes your energy and effort to get better at it, and finding mentors. And
yeah,
that's really unique. And that's why I think there's like a handful of people that I can count on my hand that I think of as folks I know that are great horsemen. And I know tons of people that ride, and know tons of clinicians and trainers. And then there's like a handful of people that you think of as really great. And if you look at their story, they weren't just born a great horseman. They've put in like an ungodly amount of hours working on it compared to the rest of us. And
in that
that's
situation,
pretty inspirational. That in itself will keep you going.
Oh yeah. Because you don't have a professor standing there over you, drilling you. You got to have this done by end of the quarter or whatever. It's you. You're the one
Yeah.
that has to push yourself. And that's hard for people to do sometimes.
Yeah. It's like taking an online course, and you got to
Yeah.
get good at being a self auditor. Not, yeah, there's a lot of moving parts to that, right? And then granted, you might be around some folks that see you getting a little bit better, but in their mind, it looks like you're getting a lot better. So they're telling you that all the time. And you're like, great, boy, I'm breezing right through this horsemanship thing. I'm getting great at this. Then you get around someone that actually knows something, and they're like, hey, man, you don't know nothing. That'll knock you back a peg or two. And
I had an experience one time. I tried to get to as many Buck's clinics as I could. And, but when I was doing clinics of my own, we were both working the same hours and across the country from one another. So it was a little difficult. But one year I was starting the season out in Texas, I believe, and Buck was going to have a clinic in Arizona. And so I entered that clinic thinking I'd go down, hit that clinic, and then go on and start my clinic there in the spring. So, and I'd been doing clinics for a few years. Um, and I got down there to that clinic and we were doing stuff and he had us doing an exercise. So it was on the ground, doing groundwork, exercise on the fence there. And, and I had my mule and I was doing what we were supposed to be doing. And Bucky comes across the microphone there and he said, Brad, he said, I can see you're really starting to get some feel going in there now. He says, it's really nice to see that. And I thought, well, obviously he hasn't been paying attention, maybe, because I've been doing this for a while. But I quickly realized that, wow. So I've been doing this for a while, but I haven't been doing it with any feel, evidently. So it was a good point to bring up because I really keyed into that. And I still pay more attention to feel than a lot of other things just because of that little lesson there. But I thought I was pretty good till. But that's a hard thing. You can talk about it and whatnot, but I don't know what the hell it is. So, but I knew then what it was because I was told that I finally started using a little bit of it. So,
Right.
yeah, it's pretty funny. You had to venture into the territory there.
So,
and have someone there to say, you got it. You're doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's why even if you are doing your own clinics, like we kind of said earlier, you got to keep looking for people to learn from. You always have to be getting better because the worst thing in the world is just to become stagnant because you've cashed a few clinic checks or something.
And that's, on the bright side of technology, I guess, that's a lot easier to do now than it used to be in the old days. Not one that long ago, it doesn't seem like, but because there's so much out there on thanks to technology. You can pick up your phone or your computer and you can watch the Buck channel or you can see somebody's doing clinics or virtual clinics and you can hear people talking and see them doing where you never could before unless you physically went to a clinic. And you sure couldn't get to that many clinics and see that many people like you can nowadays. So
yeah,
there sure is a lot more information out there, which is helpful for people.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So how I know you said you did the clinics for 20 years and now you've kind of transitioned into being a maker. So can you talk about how you went through that transition? Was that, I guess, how you arrived at that decision?
Yeah, that was pretty easy. Because before I was introduced to horsemanship and started on that path, I was becoming a saddle maker, and I'd
Hmm.
I'd got kind of caught up in the craze, I guess, back in the '80s when Kurt Marcus brought these photos and articles about all this buckaroo stuff and these big ranches and whatnot to people's attention in the Western Horseman magazine. And I'd never seen anything like that. Didn't know there was anything like that out there. And a lot of people didn't either. They had these kind of interesting looking gear that I'd never seen before. And and I'd always had a little interest in doing leather work. When I was a kid, I got the big Tandy starter kit that I think everybody started out with. Great big yellow and brown box full of little projects and tools. And so I was interested in that. And I finally got the urge to build a saddle. And I had become friends with the guy. He was on the Flying D Ranch there out of Bozeman. At that time, it was a big cow outfit, one of the big cowboy outfits in the country. And this guy was a cow boss on the Cherry Creek side, and he was a saddle maker, had a little shop there at his house, and he kind of got me started building a saddle. Um, I He got me a tree and the leather and a few basic tools, and I bought a couple of books. That was the only thing that was available. They weren't very good books either, but I wanted to try this, so I ended up with some help. I made my first saddle, and it was not a real prideful thing. Your first saddle never is, but it did resemble a saddle, and it you could you keep it on a horse and whatnot. But then I got some other saddle jobs. Some friend of mine wanted me to make him one, and so I got started building saddles back then. And so I really liked that. I ended up getting a little shop and putting some things together. Um, Ended up going out to Jordan Valley, the Big Loop, which was the only thing that was going on back then that we knew of. And a lot of guys it was a juried show back in that day. So you had to wrote a letter and sent in some pictures of my work. And they told me I could come and put up a booth there. And so I went there for a few years and that's a whole nother topic in a way, but that was really an interesting time in the '80s there, um, because there was all these young saddle makers and bit makers and guys starting out that were really wanting to be somebody, and so we converge on this place and hope that these people would like what we did. And in looking back now, this is 30 some years later, some of these young guys that were just starting out they're the cream of the crop right now. Kerry Schwartz, he was there starting out. Ernie Marsh, the bit maker, was there starting out. Mark Broger was there. Um, it, all kinds of these guys. And we were there just, like I say, hoping these people would like our stuff. And I remember talking to Ernie Marsh one time there, and he had all of his bits out there and asked him how things were going. And he said, well, he says, it's not going too bad. I hope we can just sell enough where we can make gas money to get home on. And that's kind of where we all were at that point in time, is just hoping we can make gas money to get back home on. But and I pursued that. So then back in, let's see, late '80s and then early '90s, um, I was making a few saddles of my own and selling them and taking orders. And there was a mail order outfit out of Bozeman called Bridger Creek Outfitters. And they hired me and I started doing strap work for them. And I was still building my own saddles. And and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a saddle maker. And until that fateful day where I was introduced to horsemanship. And so that kind of took over. And so I was doing both. Kind of did a few clinics, and I was still making saddles, and so I ended up quitting that outfit and moved to Helena, Montana. And I had a little shop in a kind of a feed store deal there, and was there for a little while, and then we moved on over here, back over here to the Bitterroot, and I leased a place, had a barn and a big indoor arena and whatnot, so it allowed me to do a lot more with riding outside stuff and boarding horses and doing events at this arena and whatnot. So then the saddle making kind of got pushed to the side a little. I was still doing a little work, but and I like doing either one. I was just whatever one took off was what I was going to do, and it turned out that the clinics took off. But I carefully boxed up all my tools and all my stuff, kept all my machines, and in the event that I needed something to fall back on. So when the time came to start staying home and opening the shop I have now, I had some experience. I had all the equipment and the tools, so it was just a pretty easy thing to do, just to kind of slide into that. I got the idea for it. Um, I really I don't do saddles. I don't build saddles anymore. When I started this shop, hadn't built a saddle in probably 20 years, and there's a lot of good saddle makers out there now. And I thought it'd be futile to try and catch up with the rest of the pack and do good work. But I did always like strap work, so that's what I did. I tried to fill a little gap there, and because a lot of saddle makers maybe don't have time or desire to do strap work for people, so I was kind of filling that hole, hopefully. And so far, it's worked pretty well. This is my 8th year here, and doing headstalls and breast collars and spur straps and slobber straps and saddlebags and all that kind of stuff. Um, and I like it. A lot of opportunities. It changes a lot. It keeps things interesting. I'm not hammering on the same saddle every day for a month. It's you do a headstall, and a few days later you're doing something else, and so I like the variety. But I like what I do, and it's working pretty well for me. Um, as with anything else, it's something you really have to work to get good at. A lot of people making headstalls. I mean, anybody can screw a buckle on a piece of leather and make their own headstall. That's not too big a deal. But what I really work at is making nice stuff, really nice stuff, because this is a business. This is what pays the bills. It's not a hobby. And, I'm not retired and give me something to do in my retirement or anything. It is what pays the bills. And so because of that, and because of who I am, basically too, you really strive to do the best you can possibly do. And so because of that, it's working pretty well. So as far as the transition goes, it was easy because I already had some know-how and the tools and had the desire. So I just slipped right in there and went on with it.
Yeah. So, at the risk of opening up a very large rabbit hole, I'm going to ask you this. How would you describe in layman's terms? I know you said you do a lot of strap work. Let's use a head stall, for example. That's what is on your Facebook a lot. Talk about the things that would make a really, really nice, high quality head stall different from, maybe the head stall you get down, the stock one you get down at the local tack store, and why, a customer would choose to buy a really high quality head stall from you as opposed to that tack store head stall.
Well, one of the most important things is fit and function. as far as I'm concerned, they need to fit right and they need to function properly. Beyond that, it's obviously the quality of the leather that you use. Needs to be the best leather out there that we use, and the way that it's put together. Um, there's a lot of little seemingly insignificant things that I do on just a simple headstall that make it or help it to function better. Um, you hold it in your hand. Most people don't know why this one looks and feels so much better than that one. But there's the finishing of it, the finishing of the edges, little taperings here and there. The the buckles are all stitched down construction; they're not screwed on or anything like that. The all the pieces when I build, like say, a crown strap that goes over the horse's head, when I glue the liner on it and stitch it, that crown strap is bent in the shape that it's going to be when it goes on the horse. It's built that way. I don't build them flat and then try to bend it and mash it into place because I think that weakens the fibers on both ends, the top and the bottom end. So they're built on the curve that they're going to need when they're on a horse. Same with the brow band. So that way your liner is not wrinkled up against the horse's face.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I could see how that you were talking about because of the person you are, right? To get good at your horsemanship, you have to be incredibly detail oriented, and all these little things you're talking about, that's incredibly detail oriented to someone who doesn't really know anything about leather work. It's like, man, he is thinking about everything. So I could see where that kind of pursuit would fit your personality.
It does, yeah. And and so and it's just I don't know any other way to be. I mean, you have to do the best job you possibly can, and you have to keep checking yourself on that too. Is this as good as I can do, or can I do this a little bit better next time? And so it's a good thing. I enjoy it. It works for me. Obviously, works for a lot of other people. I got a lot of repeat customers that come back for more, and a lot of people getting their first piece. And like I say, a lot of times a person might not look at it. They may not be able to pick out all these little things, but the little things are in there. And that's what creates the big final product there. And I look for longevity. If I build a headstall or something like that, I'm building it not for necessarily for the person that's ordering it, but building it for who he might want to pass it on to someday. That's kind of what I look at because this a lot of this stuff. I mean, it's expensive. It's nice gear, and there's no reason with even a little bit of care. There's no reason why it can't be passed on to somebody someday. And the local feed store headstall, it's a fraction of the cost, but it'll last a fraction of the time too.
Oh, looks like we got some echo. So, as someone who likes the idea of having something that maybe his kids or grandkids has one day. I mean, that's how I look at all the custom saddles I'm buying and stuff. Again, good Lord willing, you can hold on to them, and maybe you're riding out there one day, a long time from now, and watching your grandson ride through the pasture with your saddle, like one of the first saddles you ever got. So, it makes sense that a headstall would be no different. And, Brad, we could, I could talk about this stuff for hours with you. We're going to have to wrap up here, right now. And, we'll just have to have you back on next time. Maybe, once Ben and I get our mule colts, we'll get you back on. Talk about what the heck is wrong with these things. The heck is wrong with these things.
We have a lot to talk about then, wouldn't we?
Yeah, no kidding. But Brad, we appreciate you coming on the podcast. This was episode 38 with Brad Cameron. Tell you what, one last thing before we go. Do you want to do just a quick plug for the Bridle Horse Shop? I know Ben and I found out about you on Facebook. Is that the best way to see your work and get a
Facebook
hold
is
of you?
good. The website is bridlehorsegear.com. And but either one is a good way to get a hold of us and see what I'm making. And yeah, either one. The Bridle Horse Shop on Facebook and bridlehorsegear.com on the website.
And we'll put that website in our
Okay.
show description. So people listening at home, you can look at the show description and see the link to Brad's website. So, Brad, again, we really appreciate you taking time out of your day from making those fancy head stalls and other strap work to talk with us for a while. This was, like I said, it was a really enriching conversation.
Good. Thank you for
really
having me.
enjoyed
I
it.
enjoyed talking to you guys, and who knows, works out, we'll do it again.
We'd love to do that. Thanks, Brad.